My name is Willard Pegg, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm a member of the Central Group in Greensboro, North Carolina. I've been sober ever since I could remember. I'm going to tell this little story because I think if you'll listen to it, it'll mean a lot. This man came home from work this night and was sitting and watching television, and a little boy came to him and says, Dad, do you believe everything you hear? And the man thought for a few minutes and he says, no, son, I can't say that I do, but why do you ask? And then the little boy says, well, do you believe everything you see? And Dad thought for a few minutes and he said, yes, son, I believe everything I see, but why do you ask? And the little boy says, well, you know that old homemade school teacher of mine? I said, yeah. He says, well, today in school, a little mouse ran across the floor, and when he ran up her legs and she squeezed him with her knees, she squeezed a gallon of water out of him. I feel like this morning that we're going to get a whole lot out of it than we ever put in it. I believe that's why I told that story. So if you'll listen, I believe you'll get a whole lot out of it. Our speaker this morning is a man that I've known for many years. I heard him when he first started on the circuit, and he was one of the wickedest old men I've ever known. We called it cussing in those days, and he was a cusser, I'll tell you. A little girl up in Blackstone, Virginia, asked him one day, Dave, if you'll just clean it up a little bit, we'll appreciate it. And this started him out, and he's a real clean speaker now. This man came to this program. He belonged to the church. He's a Republican. He's an alcoholic. And I don't know if he was this when he came to AA or not, but he is now. A pokerholic. A hillbilly lawyer. So you see, this man had a lot to overcome. Some of it he has overcome. He used to remind me of this story. This young man died and went to heaven, and a little later on there was a young lady died and went to heaven, and they met up there, and they wanted to get married. And it seems as if St. Pete runs a show up there, and you have to go through him to do anything. So they went to St. Pete and told him they would like to get married. And he said, I can't let you get married now, but come back in 100 years and I'll see what we can do. Seems like that's a short time. So at the end of 100 years, they went back and told him they were still in love and they'd like to get married. And he says, well, I can't let you get married yet. He says, come back at the end of another 100 years and I'll see what we can do. So they waited, and at the end of the second 100 years, they went back and told him they were still in love and they would like to get married. And he says, well, I'm going to let you get married this time. But I want to tell you this. Marriage is final up here. And the boy says, well, I don't fully understand what you're talking about. And he says, well, I'll tell you, son. It took us 200 years to get a preacher up here to marry you, and we're not expecting any lawyers at all. Great hopes for our speaker this morning because I believe he's going to make it. I really do. He's still got a lot of changing to do. Not very long ago, he was over in the state of Texas. And he violated some laws over there and almost got arrested. I think he'll tell you a little about that himself this morning. Truly, now, our speaker is a fine man. He is a real, honest-to-God A member. He talks about it, but he also lives it. And this is what counts up here. He's a former delegate to the General Service Conference. He's really a rock of AA in East Tennessee. He's a real gentleman, and I don't believe we needle Dave a lot, and I think we should talk about the good things about Dave just a minute or two. Dave is an excellent speaker, and his story means much, and this is why I told that little story in the beginning. If you will really listen, I believe we'll get more out of it than we had when we came. So it was a great deal of pleasure that I introduced to you Dave R., the Sage of the Smokies, Maryville, Tennessee. Dave.
Well, I don't know that I have very much left to say. You already know all about me. But I do appreciate, Willard, very much the latter part of your remarks. And I suppose to follow the usual course in these meetings, I'll tell you that my name is Dave Rozier, and I'm an alcoholic. By the grace of God and the help of people like you, I haven't found it necessary to drink anything containing alcohol since September 22nd, 1949. As Willard told you, I am a member of the Maryville, Tennessee group of AA. It's the best group in the whole wide world. And I say that with humility because I started the group. Gene and I had been attending a group over in Knoxville, 15 miles away, for about 9 years, and we decided it's time we had one in Maryville, and we started, and most of the time it was just Gene and I, and occasionally just one of us there, but finally another poor soul dropped in, and after experimenting a while, he kept it, and the group grew. Of course, I presided at all meetings. I read the purpose and the steps and discussed whatever might be on my mind, and if there's any time left, I would occasionally let one of the other boys say a word or two. I got there early, I started the coffee, got everything in readiness, and that group just went along fine. But as happens in so many cases, these upstarts with 6 or 7 or 8 years sobriety started making suggestions. And they kept just boring in, you know. And you know what my job is now with that group? I'm the general program chairman. Now, we have an actual program chairman every month. And I'm the one who appoints the program chairman. That's every damn thing I have to do with the group. And you know, it's miraculous the way a group will progress without the old-timer having his finger in every pie. But it is a wonderful group. Some wonderful folks in it. I had some notes here. When they just tell your story, It knocks the hell out of your opening. I am happy to be in Shreveport again, where there's so many old friends, not only Louisiana, but Texas. There's the head king of Texas up in the front row here. And the joining station, I believe at this meeting, seriously, I believe I see more old-timers from various parts of the South and Southwest than I see anywhere else. And that speaks well for your whoever runs it, and you know who. But I do thank Watt and his committee for letting me come back again to Shreveport. Now, after talks like Harold's and that cutie from California, Luann, I'm just in the wrong league here. I can't match talks like that. But you paid my way down here, and frankly, I'm not worth it. But I'll do my best to earn it. I don't have much new for you. All I have is the simple story of a simple drunk who found sobriety and a new way of life through AA. Most of what I say is a great deal of it will be something I've read or heard. There's not much original here. But I would like for this meeting's supposed to be over at 11? Don't set your watch back. But I would like to look at a fella back yonder. He had my name, but I like to think of him as a different person. Tragic figure, but comical, and occasionally a rather lovable lush. And I don't want to judge him too harshly. And as I say, I like to think of him as another man who bore my name. And in doing that, I think probably my talk will differ from the typical in two respects. I hear occasionally a talker speak of having a period of sociable drinking. I never had that. I never enjoyed it. You know, a sociable drinker, I think, is a person who doesn't have any appreciation for good liquor. I say I didn't. I never drank socially because the first time I drank, I got sick. I don't mean nauseated. I mean sick. And the next time, and the next time. And eventually, when I got to the point where it didn't make me sick, I was already hooked. I was an alcoholic. So I didn't have the pleasure of that delightful interlude I hear some of you speak of as sociable drinking. You know, puking and sociability just don't mix. And another respect in which I think my story differs is that I started a little later than the average. I was almost 30 before I started drinking. And there was no reasonable excuse for it at all. I had finished Vanderbilt Law School, second in my class. Damn bookworm beat me out in first place. I I'd established a practice in a small county seat up in the mountains of East Tennessee. I had built up a pretty nice practice. For the first time in my life, I had some money I could call my own. I was able to take care of my mother and baby sister. I taught the men's Bible class in the church. In the mountains, we have descriptive names for some churches, like the Methodist Church, Presbyterian Church, Catholic Church. But when we say the church, that's the Baptist Church. They even elected me alderman of this town. Commissioner, I believe you call them. That may or may not be considered an honor. And I was keeping company with the most attractive young lady in town. Now, I say that not boastfully, but to point out that I had no problems. Nothing bugging me. Well, why should a fellow in that situation start drinking? You know, I'd hear these fellows tell about the drinking parties they'd been on, parties to which I wasn't invited. And I made up my mind that my life was not complete, that I was missing something. Well, I sure as hell was. And I found out later what some of those things were that I'd been missing, and none of them were good. You know, it didn't take very long for me. Of course, my business fell off. Nobody wants a drunk lawyer, drunk doctor, ditch digger, anything else. Then my credit eroded. People started avoiding me. They didn't fire me as Sunday school teacher. I just didn't go back. A bunch of damn hypocrites anyhow. And I didn't run for alderman anymore. And I just went on down, and in the meantime, I'd married this lovely girl, and we had two babies, 15 months apart, little girls. I had a friend in Congress who learned about my plight, and he came over to see me one day, and he asked me how I would like to have a job with the government. And I told him, well, I would like to consider it. I went home and told my wife about it. She says, you call Congressman Reese right now. I said, no, honey, it's not done that way. I'll call him tomorrow. Well, we had breakfast the earliest the next morning we'd ever had since we'd been married. And her parting words to me when I started the office was, you call Mr. Reese the first thing, and I did. And I got the job. I believe it was Senator Penrose, an old-timer from Pennsylvania, who said once that a government job is the last refuge of the incompetent. There may be those who will question that, but in my case, it was true. Now, that was way back yonder. And I went in under one administration. Then in 1932, the great catastrophe hit this country, and you know who was elected. Well, I stayed right on and got promoted. Some friends had come up, and then we were right in the Depression then, you know. And my friends had come up from Tennessee and said, Dave, how do you hold on? Well, I had an answer. I said, the Democrats don't have sense enough to run the country, and they've got to have some of us Republicans to do it. Now, that's smart. When good lawyers were just, good Democratic lawyers were just itching for the job like I had and blowing. But that's a drunk. Another thing I did in my government career, I fell out with my boss. That's another smart thing. But it's a drunk, you know. We go around these joints, we don't pick on a little fella, we pick on a big fella. Someday we're going to buff a big fella. Of course, we get a lot of hell beat out of us in the course of it, but someday we're going to do that. Well, the only thing that saved me was that my boss wasn't right bright. He didn't have much sense. But you can imagine a drunk and a fool just locking up like two wild cats. And as a result, there wasn't any work coming out of our unit. We'd chosen up bats just like kids do on the sandlot. He had his first lieutenant, I had mine, right on down the line to the two messengers. One was mine, one was his. And each side was always trying to get something on the other. And there's practically no work went out of the unit. Of course, I was continuing my drinking. You see, a thing like that, a man, you just got to drink to stand it. And in the meantime, I built up a pretty bad attendance record. But I had a doctor who, for $5, would give me a certificate that I was ill. See, in the government service, you can't just go off and take it on annual leave. You've got to apply for your annual leave in advance. But sick leave, of course, a person gets sick, but they can't help that. I didn't pay a great deal of attention to it, but one day the personnel officer called me down, and he had a whole raft of these certificates. I said, Rozier, I'm no doctor, don't pretend to know anything about medicine, but as a layman, I know that no human being could have intestinal flu as long and as often as you have and still be alive. Now, he says, you either start coming in here the morning after payday or find you a new disease. Well, I promised him I would, and I kept my word. I found a new disease. Well, this had to come to a head sometime, and of all departments in Washington, it had to be the Interior Department. Some of you older heads will remember Secretary Harold Ickes. He was a rough Betty, but honest as the day is long. And he called my boss and me and our respective first lieutenants down to his office. He said he'd been worried about that division. It was the Division of Investigations of the Interior Department. Said he'd been worried about it, but he couldn't get any answers. And he said there's no work coming out, and I've had to make a decision. And I've made that decision. I'm going to abolish the thing right now. Says there's no more Division of Investigations. But, he said, I'm going to try to take care of all of you somewhere else in the department. And I was one of the first ones he looked at. He said, Rozier, there's a junior attorneyship open out in the Billings, Montana office. Siberia. And you know that hurt. I said to myself, here I've given 11 of the best years of my life to my government, and they offer me a job they give kids just getting out of law school. Well, I didn't say anything. I didn't want to hurt the old man's feelings. And you know, I looked around Washington at various other departments and units, and none of them seemed to have any need of my particular type of ability. And it was necessary that I return to Tennessee and try to build a practice of law again. They were building a big ordnance works at at Kingsport, Tennessee, they were spending $75 million. Now, back in 1941, that was a lot of money. And I figured if I went there, some of it would stick to my fingers. I didn't know just how, but where there's that. And you know, us drunks, we always like to be where there's money. And, but coming down on the train, I did a little thinking, serious thinking. And I concluded that my drinking probably had something to do with my difficulties. And I made up my mind to do something about it. And I will say this in my defense. I went to Kingsport, opened my law office, and I didn't drink a thing containing alcohol, liquor, wine, beer, anything of that nature for almost 3 weeks. And at the end of that time, I took a friendly drink with some friends and wound up in their friendly jail. Now, that's a great recommendation for a lawyer to a new town to get in jail. But I got in and in and in. They told it on me. It could or may not have been true, but I guess they told it on 1,000 lawyers. A drunk was brought in, and he says, I started questioning him, and he says, I want to talk to my lawyer. And the officer said, who is your lawyer? He said, Mr. Rozier. And the officer says, well, Mr. Rozier's in the next cell, and as soon as he sobers up, I'll get you together. But I just kept on getting in jail and getting in jail. And my law business didn't prosper. In fact, it didn't get off the ground. I had taken down what at that time was a substantial sum of money that had accumulated in my retirement account. I'd spent it. I had spent what I could borrow. I'd begged some money and spent it. And I was even accused of stealing money. Now, that was a dirty lie. I want to tell you exactly what happened. They elected me adjutant of the American Legion post there in Kingsport. And as adjutant, it was my duty to collect dues. It was also part of my duties to send those dues on to headquarters at Nashville so the men would get their membership cards back. Now, I performed 50% of those duties to perfection. I really collected those dues. But I was a little dilatory about sending them on to Nashville. So the most natural thing happened. I got their money and my money mixed up. Now, in the law, that's known as the commingling of assets. Well, having mixed them up like that, when I spent money, I didn't honestly know whether it was their money or my money. You can see that. Until it was all gone. And then I knew I'd spent their money and mine too. Well, you know how they start rumors about you when you're drinking a little. And I heard this little mumbling, and it kept increasing in volume. And finally, I went out and got a couple of friends to sign a note for me for the amount. I don't remember whether it was 30, 60, or 90-day note. They paid it whenever it became due. got the money on the note and sent it to Nashville in a huff, and I said, that'll take care of it. Now, in looking in retrospect, as I said in the beginning at this fella, I was a victim of a giant conspiracy. People just ganging up on me, that's what a conspiracy is. And the best I can figure, it started with my comrades in this American Legion post. They wanted to destroy me. They didn't fire me as adjutant. And they figured that if I kept collecting dues, I would do the very same commingling job again. And how right they were. You know, it's a peculiar thing about us drunks. We'll get caught in a bear trap and just finally get out, and as soon as our ankle is healed, we'll go right back. Isn't that right?
Oh, I've been caught this time.
And I did. Well, the same old thing. Wonder why we're not getting our membership cards back. Wonder if Dave sent the money in. Wonder if he still got it. I believe he may have spent it. And word came to me that one little old fellow in the post said, he's guilty of fraudulent breach of trust. Oh, what in the hell does that little illiterate know about fraudulent breach of trust? That's lawyer talk, judge talk. He just happened to be right, but he didn't know it. And then the final blow came to me that one of them had said, he has stolen our money. Well, that required getting these legal brains working, you know. I had to analyze that situation. So I got me a jar, a mason jar, of course, white lightning, and I went to my office and started analyzing. Now, I said, they accused me of stealing. Oh, there's no such offense as stealing. It's larceny. That's the proper legal term. Now, I said, let's see, what is larceny? Larceny is the unlawful taking of the goods or money of another with the intention of converting it to one's own use and depriving the true owner thereof. Now, I said, let's just set the facts up against that definition. Did that money come into my hands unlawfully? No. It was my duty to collect it. Did I intend to deprive them of it? No. I meant to pay them back. I didn't know just when or how, but sometime I was going to pay it back. And there was the answer. I didn't steal their money because I didn't commit the crime of larceny. Embezzlement, yes, but not larceny. But that's just another example of how they'll build a mountain out of a molehill just because a fellow takes a few drinks. Well, it was time to go out again, you know, then. I had the answer, see. All I had to do is get a couple fellas to sign my note. Well, there are a lot of people in Kingsport who pretended to be my friends. But you know, not a one of them would sign my note. They wouldn't stand still long enough for me to ask them. And things were just getting tough. One dreary morning, I was in my office. I don't know how I happened to be there in the daytime. I'd come in and sleep. We had one of these couches that you've heard those dirty stories about that lawyers have in their offices. I'd come in and sleep, and then early in the morning I'd be gone. There's nothing pleasant happening anywhere. Nobody coming in with any nice news, or nothing over the telephone about a little old check or something that had got hung up somewhere. But I was sitting there, and who should walk into my office but my brother? He was living in Kentucky at that time. Said he's just passing through Kingsport. You don't come from Kentucky and pass through Kingsport. You run right into a mountain. See, I saw what was coming. Another one of these family conferences. You ever been in one of those? They usually happen on a Monday morning. Of all times. Here's old Joe. He's lying there. Dying, just plain dying. Mouth full of cotton. Shaking. Here's footprints, footsteps up out in the hallway. And the door to his room squeaking, you know. He looks up and there she stands. Joe, why do you do this to us? How does Joe know? And after a long pause, Joe, we love you. Imagine that. They poured out his liquor. They won't let him get out to where he can get a good shot. And they're denying him the one thing that would put life back into his body. And they have the unmitigated gall to say, we love you. Well, I could see this family conference developing. He said, well, how have you been? I said, well, pretty good. He said, how's business? Well, I said, you know, it takes a little time to build up a law practice in a new town. I'd only been there 3 years and a half. He said, how are money matters? I said, well, they could be better. And finally he looked me right in the eye and he said, how much do you owe those boys? See some big mouth. Yes. Got all the way to Kentucky. Well, I gave him a figure. He said, well, is there anything else bothering you? Well, the only thing bothering me back then was something that had jail connected with it. And I said, well, there are a few checks outstanding. He wanted to know what they amounted to. And I gave him a figure on that. It was tremendously low, it turned out. And he said, well, can you pay him? I said, well, not right this minute. I didn't have a dime on me. He said, well, Eleanor and I have been talking. It's his wife. He said, you've had a lot of trouble. You've been lonely. This lovely girl had passed away. The doctor said it was heart trouble, and I know it was. A broken heart. She had seen this fine, upstanding young lawyer just disintegrate. It was more than she could bear. He said, we've been thinking about selling out in Kentucky and moving back to East Tennessee. that time, Kentucky was one of the few states still Democratic. He said, I want to bring my boy up in Republican territory. And I want to send him to Maryville College. Now, my brother's a fellow who really looks ahead. At that time, his boy was 1 year old. And he said, we have thought about having you to come and live with us. But, you ever get that one? I wouldn't have opened my mouth to save his life. And after waiting some while, he said, we'd have to have an understanding about your drinking. I said, you needn't worry. I've had it. And he said, I'm glad to hear that. Now, my brother, he's a pretty good fellow, but he's led a terribly monotonous life. He's thought about such things as supporting his family and buying a home and educating his son. He's never really lived. So he got me out of Kingsport just ahead of the sheriff. Came down near Maryville and bought a place some 5 or 6 miles out. Set me up in an office there, bought me some clothes, had my teeth fixed. You know, drunks always got to have those teeth worked on. And he would bring me in from the farm every morning to the office and pick me up at the end of business hours and take me back. And he would drop in at odd times during the day. See? He didn't trust me. And I thought, oh boy, you've got me under your thumb right now, but one of these days I'm going to show you one that you'll never forget. Now, I didn't get drunk intentionally, really. But after some 3 or 4 months, I was getting to feel pretty good, and I knew that I couldn't drink a whole lot. But I said, if I get me a pint, I can take a drink about the middle of the morning and another in the middle of the afternoon. And unless he's lucky to come in, I believe it's 18 minutes, isn't it? It stays on your breath, whatever it was. I'll get by with it. So I got me a pint till somewhere about 9 or 9:30. And when I ordered my third pint just before noon, I was in pretty good shape. So I got out, and for the next day or two, I don't know much, but I don't know a thing about it, but I came to the second or third morning, and I was sitting on the edge of a bed in one of these establishments on a side back road that we refer to as tourist courts. You know, they cater to transient trade. I mean, transient as hell. You know what it is. And I was hating everybody, but most of all, the fellow who put me there, my brother. And after a while, he drove up. Very fellow. Parked. I just thought, oh boy, if you say 2 words to me, I'm going to whip you till you can't see. And he must have thought the same thing. So he came up, opened the door. The doors are never locked, you know. People go in, they put a chair up against it, and when they finish, when they read the email, well, he looked in. He said, how are you? I said, I'm all right. He said, well, let's go. I said, go where? He said, home. Well, he was my brother, and I was hungry. And I decided to go with him, and I got in the car and we started off toward the farm. There wasn't very much conversation going on. I didn't think of any topic worthy of discussion. And finally he said, when you came with us, we had an understanding. He said, would you care to talk about it? I said, I'm glad you brought it up. This has been a lesson to me. And the poor fellow, in the same words and the same tone of voice, said, I'm glad to hear that. Well, he took me on back to the farm, and Eleanor washed my shirt and some other clothes, and I shined my shoes. A couple mornings later, I went back to the office, and it was another one of those times when I was sort of getting up to doing something, as I had so many times. But it was always tomorrow, you know. I had some matters I had to get straightened out. That was not the silliest reason you ever heard, a drunk straightening something out. But I felt that I'd turned over a new leaf. I heard a speaker say not too long ago that the only man that ever had any luck turning over leaves was old Adam. I didn't have too much luck because it was just a very few weeks till I was back at a similar place to the one before. And my brother didn't come for me that time. He sold out and moved away before I ever sobered up. Saw a friend of mine after I got sort of walking around sober. He said, well, I understand Cecil's gone. I said, yeah. Well, he said, in fact, I saw him the day he left. Did you? Yes. He said, I asked him about what was going to become of you. He said, you know what he said? He said, to hell with him. Now, you imagine that. Your only brother deserting you at a time he might be of some help to you. And oh, what a liar he was. You know, he said he was moving there to bring his boy up in Republican territory. Where do you suppose he moved to? Biloxi, Mississippi. And his boy never saw the inside of Maryville College. He finished LSU about 3 years ago. That's the way they'll lie to you. So my brother was in the conspiracy. Well, they just started getting in one after the other. The lawyers there in Maryville, they joined the conspiracy. And just nothing. Well, one day I was over at court, and it was in session, and I walked along between the judge and the jury and stepped on something slick and fell. And then one day I was over at court, and there was a lawyer there with a real deep voice, and he was a crackerjack lawyer, and ruthless as he could be. And his nickname was Bully. And he was trying a case against a young lawyer, and he just stomping all over him. And finally he asked one of his witnesses a patently leading question. And there's more than I could. I didn't have a thing to do with the lawsuit. I was just sitting over there. But I jumped up and said, I object. And the judge says the objection's good, but it comes from the wrong quarter. Well, probably those things wouldn't have been too bad, but I collected some money for a lady, some $600. And you know, got it mixed up. And you know, that's way over 20 years ago, and I still hear echoes of that thing. But back then, that terrible lawyer Rozier taking poor widow Jones' money. And that was really laughable. She's not poor at all. She's still living, a rich old woman. Now, if any of you fellows still have a little larceny left in your heart, and if you were first-class drunks, you still have just a little speck of it. And you get to the point where you just got to have money. You go out and rob a bank or hold up a train, but you be mighty sure you don't ever defraud any old widow woman. Well, the lawyers appointed a committee to start disbarment proceedings against me. That's like taking a carpenter's hammer and saw and painter's brush, just any whole means of livelihood. But I had a friend on this committee who talked the other members into waiting till they caught me sober and talked to me. Well, I sure kept them waiting. In fact, the committee never acted. I beat them into AA. Some of the lawyers were in the conspiracy. Well, my office was in a little bank building there. Well, the only skyscraper in town, 5 stories, and had elevators. On a building that did. And one of these presidents, you ever had any dealings with a president of a little one-horse bank? They're the king of the road. They usually have a desk way over in the corner, and they get you over there and talk to you so you can be heard all over town. And he had little things. Well, one thing was that I kept the night janitor from sweeping out the corridors. Well, now, these people who criticize us, they never asked for any explanation. If they had, I could have told them old Doc was a good old fellow. And we both liked to drink. And I'd bring a jar one time, and maybe next time Doc would bring a jar, and we would get in the office and settle the affairs of state, and it'd usually be around daylight before we got through. But no, he didn't want any explanation. All he cared about was blamed floors weren't being swept. Then one time I came by this sissy dentist's office, and he had a lady strapped in, or she couldn't get up, and I leaned my elbow up on his arm of his chair and told a dirty story. But the most laughable thing was that he said, I abused the elevator girls. Now, you just imagine that. These girls are 18, 19, and 20. And I was 50 years old and past. Now, what earthly interest would a 50-year-old man have in those cute little 19-year-olds? And if they'd have told the truth, they'd have said that I never heard of one of them. I was just as gentle with them as I knew how to be. That's another instance of how people will just build up things on you when you're not guilty at all. Well, these 2 daughters are up now grown. One was a senior in high school and the other a freshman at the University of Tennessee. They had long since let me know that they'd just a little rather I wouldn't come around. And that cut deep. A man's own children, his own flesh and bone, denying it. And I worried again about what this younger generation was coming to. Of course, they knew I'd either be drunk or have a hangover or be smelling like a goat. But I put them in with this ring, this conspiracy that had developed all around me. And then it was jail, jail, jail. The last year and a half I drank, I didn't have a room. I would sleep in my office, a bootlegging joint, just wherever, quite often in jail. And I would sober up just a few days before criminal court and make enough to sort of exist on. And I specialized in liquor cases. I knew more about the law of searches and seizures than any other lawyer in Tennessee. But that was all I knew about. But that assured my liquor supply. And being in jail, it got to where it didn't mean a thing to me. I was in jail in Maryville 3 nights hand running. And when I got out, I said, I'm going over to Knoxville where a man can take a drink or two and not be treated like a bum. And I caught the 2:30 bus for the 15-mile ride to Knoxville, 2:30 in the afternoon. And as the shades of night were falling, where do you suppose I was? And the next morning I had an experience that I'd never had before. I went to court. I'd been usually able to get a bond, you know. But I'd overlooked one little detail. Knox Bonding Company had been taking me out, but I'd sort of failed to pay. And it got way up in the morning, this first night I was in the Knoxville jail, and this officer, I told him to ask the Knox bonding man to come up, and he came back after a while and said he wasn't coming. I said, well, have one of the other bondsmen come up. He says there ain't none of them a coming for you. Atrocious grammar. There we were. And one of the older fellows, the sort of a leader, got to straighten his clothes up, you know. In every jail, there's a leader. He's not elected. He's not appointed. He just emerges. He's the biggest, meanest fellow there. And we'd already been down to court, and I said, well, where are we going now? He said, the workhouse. Oh, hell no, I said. That got to be something happened. But you know, I got paroled out of the workhouse by a man who said he was paying my fine. Now, it just cost $5. He said, well, I'll pay it and you can pay me back. I said, all right, I'll do it. And I got out and he said, oh, you had $3 in your pocket when they brought you in. Well, that never happened before. I said, well, I need that to get my laundry out. And he looked at me and smiled in a knowing way and said, well, tell the sergeant I said to give you $3. And I went down and got it, and I was going to Maryville. I was going toward the bus station, fully determined. And I made a discovery. I was nervous. I needed just one drink. And I turned. I went way down in the hollow. You know, for some reason, the farther down you get, the bigger drink you can get for the money. And you get them for a quarter down there. And I had 12 of them in my pocket, but I'm just going to take one in. And I took one. No message. I took another. And I remember starting on the third. But I woke up on that very same bunk 5 times in a row. And then I decided, sure enough, I was going back to Maryville and I was going to have this thing out. I went to my office, locked the door, pulled the shades, and I didn't mean to leave there till the thing was resolved. And I'd been in close places before, and I said, well, old Dave can figure a way out of this. But you know, the more I thought, the less, well, I saw no light at all, just like being in a bottomless pit. And then the thought came to me, well, maybe God would, no. No, I've lived my life. I've got too much pride to go crawling up to God or man or any other being. And God couldn't help me if He wanted to. I've committed the unpardonable sin. Now, I didn't know what the unpardonable sin was. But I knew I'd hit all the bases. And somewhere in there I'd got it. And then the argument, well, God's not interested in people like me. It's these fine people who go to church on Sunday, who support His work. And then the parable of the 99 sheep and the one that was lost. And the parable of the prodigal son came to me. Then I had to say this, it's for me. I'm the one He's interested in. And I prayed. Just as Harold. And I think anyone else in our position, there's only one prayer we can make. God help me. And I did. Just 3 words. But in the attitude of mind I had at that time, I was saying a lot more than that. I was saying, God, I'm whipped. I'm through. I'm finished. And after the life I've lived, you don't owe me anything. And I can't promise you anything because I'm all out of resources. But out of your goodness and mercy and compassion, please help me. As I told you earlier, that was September 22nd, 1949. And I haven't had a drink since. You can have your own idea about whether God answers prayers. But I know. The next night I went over to the meeting place of Alcoholics Anonymous in Knoxville. It was back in what they call showrooms. It was an old hotel. Some of you may remember that in the old days, drummers would come to town with great trunks that they'd open up and lay out the merchandise, and the people would come in and buy samples. They don't do that anymore. They send the lady buyer to New York. And for some reason, the store manager always has to go with her. I've never figured that out. But they go up there and make their orders and they shift in. Well, this was not a meeting night, but there were several fellows sitting over, sort of a circle talking, and as I walked in and looked at them, they were clean-shaven and decently dressed and clear-eyed, and I was in the wrong place. I was looking for people like me, you see. And I didn't turn, I just started making a U-turn, and one of the fellows said, "Come on back, fellow, you're in the right place." And how true that was. I've been going back ever since. It's been a wonderful experience, one that I didn't deserve. Being sober is a wonderful change. Now, we're running late, but we started late, and I know you're going to be wondering about some of these people and things and so on. And I'll close that out very briefly for you. The office that they were about to put me out of, I'm still in the same back building, still on the same floor. I had one room then. Now I've got a suite. You know, give a drunk a couple of bucks, you know, he's got to spread it. And, I get some of the bank's business now. Now, they didn't start giving me business the very day that I went to AA. In fact, they waited 8 years and a half, but they finally got business. And I'm well situated there. My brother and I get along fine now. With the passage of time, I found it in my heart to forgive him. He visited me this last weekend on his way to New York for his son's wedding. My daughters are both married. One has 4 children, the other one 2. And those grandchildren think their granddaddy hung the moon. And I know who told them that. It's been a long time since either one of my daughters told me they'd rather I wouldn't come around. In fact, if I go to see one, as soon as I leave, she's on the phone to her sister. Daddy's just been here. This is the second time he's been here since he's been to see you. I get home, the phone's ringing off the wall, and it's the other one. Mona, when I'm gone, they'll be on the plane Friday night, honey. Don't worry. I've got a good thing going. I'm not going to blow it. I was at both their weddings, sober. And if nothing else had come out of this, that would have been enough. The oldest one I had, she was married a couple of years after I came to AA, and things were not too great a shape, but we did have a pretty nice little country wedding. But Rosemary came along a few years later, and boy, we did it up in grand style. Hired people to put the ferns and the satin ribbons and all that stuff around. The carpet down the aisle wasn't good enough. We put bed sheet material all the way around. And dressed up, you should have seen me. A white dinner jacket, one of these pleated bosom shirts with pearl studs, midnight blue trousers, patent leather shoes. It cost plenty, though. You know what they charged me to rent that outfit just for 2 days? The lawyers, I'm still at that bar. They never did throw me out. Remember, this happened in 1949. You know what they did just 2 years later in 1951? They elected me president of the very bar association they were getting ready to throw me out just 2 years earlier. Isn't that wonderful? Not because of me, but that's just an example of how people will treat us when they know and realize that we are trying our best to do something about our problem. Those folks back yonder that I said was in a conspiracy, that wasn't it at all. They wanted to help me, but I wouldn't give them a chance. And once I gave folks a chance, they've all been wonderful. Is that about all these? Well, maybe the elevator girls. Do you know what that fogey board at that bank did just a few years ago? They put in push-button elevators. Can you think of anything less romantic than a push-button elevator? And all those things are fine, but through AA, and somehow I have been able to develop a relationship with my Creator that I never had before. I see Him as a God of mercy and compassion. Not a God of retribution, not somebody who's standing and say, well, you did so-and-so on a certain date. Just like the father of the prodigal son. When we turn around and start back, he runs to meet us. And that is the big thing that AA has really meant to me. Thank you.